The Tales of Magnus and Prime. Stone Soul. Chapter 3. Black Blood. Audio by Jack Robinson.
Megan Risley.
Henry Double.
And Connor Robinson.
Calsec saw red in all that he did, anger in his vision, blood in the violence the anger led to, and after all was said and done, he'd smell rusty Theros in the air once again as the cycle repeated day after day. This had been his life since his birth, and things were unlikely to change. Tonight he needed a cool head, or a lukewarm one at least. He had caught the eager eye of an evil man, a man who sought what he held close, a weapon of great power. As the young Calsec strolled from the city, this weapon glimmered in the light of the great milky moon above. The sign of the night could be seen across all of Magnus, and tonight's half-moon would bode well for the pale boy. A half-moon was the symbol of potential, and divided people with its meaning. Some said it was optimistically full, some said it was pessimistically empty. Calsec was a man of pure optimism. Nothing was gained from doubting one's path. If someone wanted his blade, then they sought to muddy his path, and this could not happen. After a quick jaunt from Valadort proper, the small hamlet of Egil Lane came into view, a pitiful holding, full of degenerates, but the perfect place to wine and dine with the fine swine of the divine in decline. If he was to meet with this evil man, he'd choose no other place. Sitting within smelling distance of Valadort's sewage system, Egil Lane held a murky density in the air. A pungent sensation of warm rubbish burned at the nose and was enough to make even Calsec's cold face flinch. It was no surprise the people of this hamlet were so vile. Spend enough time living with filth, and you start to imitate it, become it. This was a feeling Calsec had every day on this stinking world. By the old chapel stood a rotting inn by the name of Trawlers, a place that the once desperate sailors of the west coast came to drown their sorrows over their drowned cabin mates. It was inside Trawlers Inn that Calsec would gain a chance to sit in the presence of the haggling heretic and absorb what wisdom they had to offer. Outside of the inn sat a dwarf and his posse of prats, each more inebriated than the last. Sickly men, lumpy dwarves, and a lone tattooed centaur made up this group of fools. They'd enough strength amongst them to kill a few dozen men, yet they daren't even attempt to glare a lingering look Calsec's way. They were drunken fools, but even they knew better than to challenge a blade as fine as his. Inside the inn were uglier patrons and the ugliest barmaid on all of Magnus. They were silent to his presence and left him to his business, their sole redeeming quality. At the back of the room of rotted wood and hanging herbs was a shadowy booth reserved for the boy. The booth was already occupied by the masked eccentric that sought him out.
Good day, Cyphus.
Calsec spoke in a calm and authoritative tone. He'd preferred the art of commanding others with a certain tone of voice, a cold cool that cut through any semblance of weakness. It even managed to overshadow the nasally knot at the back of his throat.
I hope you found this place well.
The collector of dark treasures, and even darker secrets, Cyphus wasn't a stranger to him, but by no means a friend. Up in the north, a kingdom of elegant elves lived amongst nature. It was a land built on the back of a recent dynasty, one aided into power by Cyphus. After helping win over an entire nation, the mysterious masked man had little to do other than absorb the knowledge of the world around him. Eventually this led him to hunting down all manner of artifacts, which now brought him to Calsec's booth.
Finding the place wasn't hard, lad. It was finding the courage to stay and weather the stench,
said Cyphus with a sour face.
Comfort isn't a luxury I can afford. Even as a man of class, I must often sacrifice things for the mission of my life.
Calsec ordered some black wine to the table, a drink both men enjoyed. Wasting no further time, the pale boy placed a hand on his blade and said,
"Shall we dive straight into the proceedings?"
The look he received back was one of disappointment. Cyphus shook his head as a faint grin peeked from the wiry gap in his mask, a familiar piece of facewear that Cowsec had once wore. The mask was a bitter reminder of a bitter winter he'd spent with a clan of bitter company. It was nice to see Cyphus had the wealth to buy his way into such a memory.
"My, you have been alone too long,"
Cyphus said.
"I, along with most civilized folk, don't just skip the interesting parts. If I'm to buy that plate of yours, I need its history. The tale is half the value when it comes to such a fine piece."
"It's no extraordinary tale. Quite the sordid affair,"
Cowsec claimed.
"Obviously. I'm sure I've heard it before, but that doesn't devalue its existence. Merely adds to the enjoyment. Tell away, lad."
"Very well,"
Cowsec begun.
"It all started around 5 years back."
The air around Valadolt was chilly past midnight. A black sky darkened the streets of Old Valor, the original town that grew into the city of Valadolt, like a cancer on the countryside. A waning moon above shone a splendid spectre of white light across the city's soft blue lake, shining somberly in the night. One of the few things Cowsec could smile at was the calming feel of water in his ears and on his skin. There was something hypnotic about a good and gentle wave upon the body. It was as if his soul was being cleansed of any scorn that gripped it, if only salvation was that easy to come by. His anger wasn't all bad anyhow. It was pure passion, expressed in the only way he knew how. There was a gap at his core, one that could only be filled by taking what wasn't his. Sometimes this would be physical, other times he was content with leeching the joy from another's expression. A parasite on society he was, but that didn't make him any less of a person. Most cower from being hated, but Cowsec only relished in it. The only sack of meat on Magnus that didn't seem to despise him wholly was an equally despicable wretch by the name of Alva. They'd met years back, when he was a student and she the teacher. Over time their roles flipped. Now she considered herself an apprentice to the boy's ego. Some were more susceptible to charm than others. She was near impervious to it. Alva had a permanent scowl on her gaunt face, one earned from a lifetime of disappointment. Whatever Cowsec had done to win her favour must have been a good one. Even he questioned her unwavering loyalty to him, and nothing set him on edge more than not knowing. Perhaps she knew this, and this was the secret pleasure she longed for, pleasure purchased with uneasy confusion. Regardless, the two had rarely been apart since school, a boy and his senior, now a man and his admirer. With a little luck and a lot of ambition, they'd soon be a god and his apostle. While the rugged Cowsec strolled along the lakeside in a patchwork long coat, the more refined Alva gracefully stepped behind in a lacy dress adorned with onyx jewels. Her goal was simple, to draw attention. His was little more covert, to never be noticed. Alva was no looker. With a twig-like form, or slender and crooked, she was never meant for romancing. It was her implied wealth that was meant to draw the eyes of onlookers. Nothing was more attractive to humans than a rich whore, and she acted the part well. After a half-hour of traipsing about the lake's many piers, a duo of delinquents showed themselves. Both swaggered by the incognito Cowsec without batting an eyelid. One was thin, one was fat, and both stunk of sickly sweet port, and something sour beneath it. They saw him as nothing but a bum, a non-issue, and perhaps the least attractive thing a human eye could see. That was the plan. The pair of overall-wearing workers stopped before Alva, looking her over from the tiara in her hair to the rings on her fingers. It didn't take long for them to buzz closer into the lacy trap.
"Well, hello there, ma'am,"
said the fat man with a dishonest removal of his cap.
"Can't help but notice you're without an escort this fine night."
"We're always willing to keep a dame safe, ain't we, cuz?"
Followed the thin man. Dishonourable fools, the pair of them. They were seeking to thieve the gems the second her guard was down. Little did they know there was no honour between the predators and prey, and Alva's guard never faltered.
"We sure are."
The fat man grinned.
"What do you say, ma'am? Could be fun, you know."
The fat man extended his arm to Alva whilst the thin man crept his own behind his back, reaching for a rusted blade. It had come, the moment Cowsec had waited all night. It was time for the crimson cloud to return, and he savoured every second.
"Well, gentlemen,"
Alva said softly. Flattered, she placed a hand on her chest and let out a small gasp.
"I'm not one to refuse a fun time."
Cowsec snuck behind the duo of dockmen with a blade of his own readied. It was a small shoto he'd picked off the corpse of an eastern warrior. Small but effective, just how he liked his weapons. No one could counter an attack they could not see coming. Alva's hand moved closer to her chest as she drew an ebony wand from her bosom. It was near invisible in the dark of the night, and the fat man had no clue what torturous fate awaited him. A magic far worse than the arcane arts, cast from a witch as black as the spells she mastered. A muted flash of black energy shot from the wand's tip, cocooned in a yoke of wispy white. It was a jolt of the dark arts, a combination of the arcane, the ephemeral, and the necrotic disciplines. It was life, death, and undeath hitting a man at once, a seemingly endless feeling of death and rebirth as the fat man's body flew back like a feather on the breeze. Whatever was left of the fat man writhed and twitched on the wooden pier. Usually a short existence followed a direct blast of dark magic. Human bodies were tough, but they always gave in to the endless cycle of pain Alva propagated. Now all that was left was the thin man. Though shocked at his cousin's state, the thin man refused to let the attack hold his own. Unflinching in the face of pain, the man aimed his knife right between Alva's emotionless eyes. She had a gaze empty of joy or focus, even amidst such a calamity. She feared not, as they'd done this dance 100 times all across the land. The thin man's stab stopped an inch from her face. He was frozen in pain as the crooked shoto became wedged between his shoulder blades. It took a good yank, but Cowsec pulled the thin man away from his underling with a smile on his face. His shoto reached to stop in the thin man's heart as Cowsec reached the climax of the moment. The softer feeling of the organs always made for a wash of relief in Cowsec's own heart. Once the heart had stopped, then the battle was won.
"Don't take this too hard, my friend. No sense in dragging any shame into the afterlife with you,"
Cowsec whispered in the thin man's ear.
"You're only human, after all."
As the thin man started to go limp, a strange smell filled the air as a viscous fluid leaked from the shoto's wound. Blood always looked black in the moonlight, if the smelly liquid was indeed blood.
"I swear they stink worse and worse,"
frowned Alva.
"Yes,"
groaned Cowsec with an odd look on his face.
"A bit late to grow a conscience,"
she said, noting the look.
"It's not that. They just seem a little different is all.